You're listening to the Gate of Trust podcast. Join hosts Matt Trush and Felix Friedberg's heart-to-heart conversations with artists, entrepreneurs, scholars and laymen who, by strengthening their trust in God despite all odds, experience outright miracles. Profound yet practical, inspiring and heart-wrenching, moving true stories of triumph against adversity. Trusting in God can literally save lives. And now, Gate of Trust podcast hosts, Matt and Felix.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Felix.
And this is the Gate of Trust podcast.
Matt, I've got a really good one for you this week.
Let's hear it, Felix.
Here goes. Leventhal the lawyer and Schwartz the doctor meet in synagogue on Shabbos. Schwartz the doctor says, Leventhal, you just don't know how lucky you are. Every time I come here to pray, people hound me with their medical problems. This one with his stomach problems, that one with his back pain. Everybody wants free advice, but you, nobody bothers you with legal questions. How do you do it? Leventhal the lawyer answers, nothing to it. Anytime somebody asks me for legal advice, I send them a bill on Monday. Schwartz the doctor loves the idea. So on Monday, he's sitting at his desk writing bills for the medical advice he gave out over Shabbos when there's a knock on the door. It's a FedEx. What's inside? A bill from Leventhal, the lawyer.
Felix, that's a good one. Tell our listeners about the lawyer that we have on the Gate of Trust podcast today.
Baruch Cohen, Esquire, is a shark civil trial litigator in L.A. who experienced a personal 9/11 when his daughter Hindy was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
6 months earlier, Baruch had become strangely obsessed with learning the Gate of Trust, which proved to be the lifeline that saved him from plummeting into complete despair.
You can order Baruch's book, Grieving and Healing Through the Prism of Torah, a bereaved parent's spiritual journey beyond pain and grief, written in loving memory of his daughter Hindy. These essays were conceived from pain, anguish, and loss, and plumb the depths of Chazal for comfort and understanding.
And email Baruch Cohen at baruchcohenesq.com to get a copy of Baruch's top 10 Tallis-bag trust tips.
And now, the masterful Baruch Cohen, Esquire. Baruch Cohen, Esquire, welcome to the Gate of Trust podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Baruch Cohen, Esquire is the first line of defense and offense in any litigation, bankruptcy, or based-in matter. Why? Because Baruch Cohen has over 30 years of experience trying cases in front of the Los Angeles Superior Courts, the U.S. District Court, U.S. bankruptcy courts, and before based-ins across the country.
Baruch's firm recently obtained an impressive settlement for clients in the U.S. bankruptcy courts. His legal briefs reflect his take-no-prisoners approach to litigation, and he shows excellence, state-of-the-art technology, creativity, integrity, and personal service are the hallmark of Baruch Cohen's legal practice.
Baruch's legal specialties include business law, corporate and partnership disputes, fraud, defamation, libel, slander, breach of contract, based-in, and serious and complex personal injury or wrongful death cases.
Baruch, in the courtroom, you sound like a shark, but we know you're also a man with a very big heart.
As background, Baruch, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your Jewish education and how you decided to go from mastery of Jewish law to mastery in the secular courts?
Shalom Aleichem, gentlemen. I'm a native New Yorker, raised as a modern Orthodox Jew in Far Rockaway, New York. Went to extraordinary yeshivas, Litvish yeshivas. I come from a long line of rabbanim, of rabbis, 80 generations of ben achar ben, son after son. So Alex Haley and roots has nothing on me. I wanted to maintain the family tradition by also getting ordained as well. I was in yeshiva for many years. While in yeshiva in Queens, I would take advantage of the lunch break and I would go to courthouses and watch court cases during the break. Some people worked out. I went to court. You know, I read court cases in the Wall Street Journal during my breaks in yeshiva. So I got the bug to become an attorney. And when I was in Wall Street and I was watching various high-profile cases, a lot of the lawyers started noticing, who is this guy with a yarmulke sitting in the back of the courtroom with these strings coming out of his pants? They were fascinated by the yarmulke that sits as, who is the stranger? And I told them, I'm interested. I'm just fascinated. They started asking me about my observations as if I was a second chair at trial or a third chair. And I got the bug. So when I went to law school here in Los Angeles, I married an LA girl. And when I got sworn in, Justice Kaczynski from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals swore me in and said, While Baruch was learning in yeshiva, he was studying the law of the prophets, Daniel, Yechezkel, and now that he's a lawyer, he will study the prophets of law. So now I'm at the point in my life and throughout my life, where I'm trying to basically merge the two worlds. The world of the professional world, the world of the trial attorney, the world of a ben Torah, someone who is serious about learning, someone serious about sharing their Torah learning, to basically make a Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. That, when I was young, I was told by a few that to pursue one means to the exclusion of the other. My parents never bought into that. I never bought into it. But unfortunately, I hear people echo those sentiments. So my sort of like reason for existing is to rebut that and show that, it's really possible to be a professional in the professional world, maintaining your values, maintaining strong values, not compromising your values, and doing good work for clients as well,
No, that's very good. So thank you so much for sharing your background. Really insightful, and it's good to learn more about you. Baruch, can you tell us about the fight to save your daughter's life and how that fight for her life from cancer transformed you?
A word before our ground zero is appropriate. So before the earth opened up and the floor fell from under my feet. So I was like anyone else, really. Upward mobility into my own world. If I saw a picture of pediatric cancer patients in Yated, Hamodia, a Jewish magazine, I would typically turn the page because I didn't want to ever think that could possibly be me one day. Perhaps it was a natural instinct, a defensive mechanism. If you have children, you never want to think about that scenario. I'm also a voracious reader, and I would read a lot of books, and I cannot to this day explain why I pulled that book out of the bookcase a half a year, 6 months prior to 9/11, our 9/11. But for some reason, even though I've learned many Musar Svarim, the Mesilas Yesharim, the Archos Tzadikim, but the Chovos Halavavos was a book that I've always, for some reason, never went near. It either intimidated me, the Hebrew was too tough, the English at that time was very difficult. And then I remember Feldheim putting out a new version of Chovos Halavavos in English, and it was manageable. And for some reason, I think things are not surreptitious. I don't think there's a coincidence. What makes you go into Barnes & Noble and suddenly you pull out that book? Because God is guiding your hand. Well, I developed, while times were calm and innocent, a voracious hunger to learn about Bitachon out of the blue. I was not responding to a crisis. I had no crisis. Things were good. Not only that, but I translated it myself. And I took notes and I looked up every single commentary. And I was asking rabbis insight when they came to my office for a check. How do you understand this? How do you understand that? I was doing research. And I put together a magnificent machberes, a notebook, solely for selfish purposes. I didn't have any intentions of giving shiurim or publishing. I wanted to know the contours of what was Bitachon, what did it mean from the perspective of innocence, untainted by trauma. Then a few days around 9/11 came our 9/11, where our daughter Hindy was diagnosed with a pediatric cancer called Ewing sarcoma. And your world turns black. Your monitor goes dark. Your mind can't think properly. You push fast forward and think of every worst case scenario. It's very hard to maintain your wits about you. And you crash. You basically free fall because there's no real playbook when you're given that kind of death sentence or news. There's no real playbook that your average guy has because the doctor isn't really giving you comfort or chizuk. The doctor is there to give you, hardcore diagnosis. And yes, there were rabbanim. Yes, there were people offering their emotional support, but I could not believe the divine orchestration and choreography that HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduced me to a book on Bitachon 6 months before the crisis that gave me a structure to hold on to, as if I was careening down a cliff and suddenly I was able to grab onto that branch or tree sticking out of the cliff to slow my descent. So when I answer your question, Felix, whether Bitachon transformed my life as a result of the trauma, the real answer is that it transformed me and prepared me like an EMT, Hatzalah guy who's trained in advance of a crisis to be able to respond properly. And I had a structure to fall back on. Of course, I still freefalled. And of course, I still, panicked like any other normal person. And I cried just like any other normal person. But when I reconnected with Bitachon during my moments of darkness, as the black hole of despair was gripping my guts, total fear, when I was able to then remember from the advice of a colleague or on my own, it strengthened me. It gave me hope. It gave me focus. It gave me a light at the end of the tunnel. And, I kept a journal of my experiences in pediatric oncology, even through a bone marrow transplant. I kept a daily journal of my connection to Hashem and how I was able to see hidden miracles, hidden signs. At times, I even compared myself to Yosef HaTzadik on the caravan to Egypt after his brothers sold him to the Midianites, when the Torah says that instead of disgusting, smelly skins on these merchants' caravan, there were beautiful incense. And you know what Rashi says? Rashi says this was an indicator because Hashem measures Kechut Asara. And during even the bone marrow transplant, while you have the test to view everything in a negative, but when, for example, we qualified for a test, it was Hashem showing me psumim in the bone marrow transplant. And if someone doesn't have bitachon and doesn't have that enormous source of chizuk, they miss out on the opportunity. The Torah never says that Yosef actually smelled the psumim, right? Just says it was there. Presumably he did, right? Presumably that was the traffic sign that was lit green of God telling him, I'm with you during this tough time. But when other people who were in such an Auschwitz of sorts, when they were going through their hell, they only saw negative. They only saw the horrible. And it was horrible. Let me not sugarcoat it, okay? It was the worst period of my life. But from a Bitachon context, I never lost my faith. I stayed very true to who I was. And the real benefit was the da'aga, the worry and the anxiety did lessen at times. And I was able to make critical decisions with my wife of what needed to be done in a proper, focused, calm manner.
Baruch, after you got through the tragedy, you started to teach Bitachon. How did your experience and the strength that Bitachon gave you, getting you through it, lead you and help you to help others?
It's a question I was never asked before, Matt. First, I put together a Bitachon shiur for my daughter's friends because they were crashing. So it was really a selfish thing. I wanted to maintain a kesher with my daughter's friends. They were all in Beis Yaakov. So it was a feel-good, shiur at the beginning. Then my brother-in-law asked me to give a shiur at a coffee bean in Los Angeles. And I did. And it was about Bitachon, just, a 1.5 hour primer. Well, the guys were from Hollywood, an actor, the voice of Aladdin, a rock and roller, all who have returned to Torah. And it resonated. It hit a chord. And my brother-in-law asked me, to do a full Shar HaBitachon thing. And I did. And Mishpacha magazine did a story on it. And it was very gratifying. And while many people would go grab their coffee in the morning, here's this group of 15, 20 guys, with his lawyer dressed in a suit about to go to court, and people would linger. And, I saw the effect that it had on the chevra. I saw the effect it had on those people who were the passerbys. It's always interesting how people would ask questions in hypothetical terms when it was really autobiographical, someone would say, let's assume someone is going through, and they're talking about themselves. But what I did find is a fascinating dynamic that two people could give the same shear, but the guy who went through the trenches and speaks from experience has a different gravitas, has a different punch. What's my proof? When the sons of Yaakov were pleading for Yaakov to release Binyamin to go back to Mitzrayim. Remember that whole story with Yosef? He said, bring me Binyamin. So Yehuda and Reuven basically guaranteed Binyamin's life. They each guaranteed, but it was Yaakov who only accepted Yehuda's guarantee. And I believe it's because at that point, Yehuda was a bereaved parent already. Aaron Onan already died. Yaakov Avinu understood that the man who is prepared to make that promise, who had children die, understands the pain of bereavement. This is the guy with the proper motivation who can guarantee the return of my son. I have found that, for example, when I speak at high schools, a Rav could give the same message that I give. But because I'm a lawyer with good cologne, sharp suit, and the beard is recent, with a good vocabulary, it sends a different message to the kids. It's from a source that's unlikely, And when I speak about Bitachon to bereaved parents or to parents going through pediatric oncology, or when I go speak to people who are having difficult times with life, the theory behind it all is if I could get through it, you can get through it. And I want to just comment, Matt, you said earlier that I've gotten through it. I don't think anyone ever gets through it. It's a work in progress. It's constantly a work in progress. When sadness takes over, it's an effort. It doesn't come automatic. I have to recall what I learned about Bitachon. I have to summon it up. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Baruch, your insights are tremendous. What would you say are some, easy ideas or practical ideas that you and others can apply in your life just on a daily basis?
It's a great question. Felix, precisely that point that you made, daily basis, is the key. Because somebody could learn Bitachon 1 year and 5 years later may actually forget some of the critical concepts and may fall prey to anxiety and fear, etc. The key is a constant awareness that God is with you. Constant. Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Summit. It's not a fad. It's not a shtick. It's not a Pirkei story. Hashem has to be real to you. And our job is to know God, to understand Hashem loves us at all times. And by the way, this is not trivial. It's not like a little cutesy jingle. These are things that I have to repeat on a daily basis. I have a chart. I can't share with you, but I have a chart. I have a list. It's called the Chidushay Baruch. My notes on Bitachon. It's in my Tallis-bag. I've written about Bitachon. I've given shiurim about Bitachon. And my notes are in my Tallis-bag. Because when I start panicking about something or I'm full of despair, I look at my notes. It's not below me. It's not above me. It's the right thing to do. Or when clients panic or when friends panic, not to get swept up in, their panic. But here's a couple of things that I remind myself on a daily basis. Like there's the 10 commandments. Here's the list of 10.
Let's hear them. What are the 10?
Thanks to David Letterman's top 10 list.
Go backwards from 10, 9, 8.
No, actually, I want to do it in proper order.
All right.
Number 1, God is in complete control of everything that happens to me, even things that seem insignificant to me. You think about that every single day, you'll stay focused. Number 2, nothing in my life can change for better or worse unless the Rabbi Shalom wants it. Someone hurts you, someone tries to hurt you. If you recognize that it's the man holding a stick, you don't get mad at the stick. Take up your issue with a guy who took a swing at you. Take your issue with Hashem, argue with Hashem, discuss it with Hashem. No one can hurt you if Hashem doesn't want it to happen. No one can help you if Hashem doesn't want. We all run to politicians. I don't go to politicians. It's hevel havolim to me. You want something done, you go to court, and you daven HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number 3, God is the only source of goodness and blessing, and the only one who can affect my livelihood. I have to do my ishtadlus, but my effort is not connected to the result. This is a chiddush to a lot of people in American culture. You work hard, you get the result. But if you study Bitachon correctly, you understand that the effort and the result is not connected. Your effort is so that you don't rely on miracles. You have a mitzvah to do ishtadlus. But at the end of the day, you're going to net what you're going to net. Number 4, I know I must do my ishtadlus, which means effort. But regardless of my efforts, only God accomplishes. That reduces worry too. It reduces the anxiety. Number 5, God has been good and compassionate to me constantly, even though I might not have deserved it. I started learning the Sefer Torah Devorah, which I highly recommend any serious Musar student learn, because he addresses, and I'm doing a segue out of order, but he addresses how to have compassion, how to work on your anger, how to work on your arrogance, how to. And the brilliance of that Sefer, and again, there's a new Feldheim version of it, which I highly recommend, is because if you really have Bitachon, would you be arrogant? No. If you really had Bitachon, would you be angry? Why would you? Hashem's in control. So, the realization that the study of Bitachon is not an isolated subject, like study calculus without necessarily knowing biology, right? They are interconnected. So when you really fine-tune the skills of Bitachon, you will see that the cost, your anger reduces. You'll see your gaiva, your arrogance will decrease. You'll see your anava, your humility will increase. Next, I know God is consistent. He has helped me in the past when I did not deserve it, so he will certainly continue to help me now. The Tomer Devorah speaks about how we get upset, we give do somebody a favor, and then they stab us in the back and screw us and hurt us. And Tomer Devorah says, wait a minute, Hashem gives you your body. He allows your heart to beat, your lungs to inhale and exhale, and he knows you're going to do an Aveira with his body. And he still allows your body to function. And if we're supposed to emulate God's ways and be an erech apayim, be a slow to anger, then certainly we shouldn't be so angry at the people who harm us. Next, God has been good and compassionate to me throughout my life, even in the face of difficulty and adversity. And that's true. Even when I went through the gates of hell, in Begates Halmoves lo irara kiyata imadi, as David HaMelech says. Even though I walked through the valley of the gates of hell, valley of the gates of Halmoves, right? Things could have been worse. These are 2 very important points that I want to stress here. Things could be worse. The Ramchal in Mesilas Yesharim says in the Midas Hanakiyos, he says the key to understanding and believing in Hashem and trusting in Hashem is the laboratory is when you're being tested with the Messiah. And can you maintain simcha as hard as it is when your soul is black with worry? And he develops a concept of simcha mitoch tzara, happiness from within the confines of grief. And he writes, look it up. And you can see this in Rav Shamshon Pinchas' Sefer, Shalom B'Tfilah. He says, no matter what situation you're in, if you're broke, you know what? You could be blind. You're sick, you could be dead. You're having a fight with him, that could be a fight with your wife. And he says, no matter what low level you're in, fantasize and think about all the degrees of hell God spared you. And if you can smile and say, thank God for that, it opens up the gates of Rachamim. Isn't that incredible? It opens up the gates of Hashpah. And, I have also, second point that I wanted to make here, is I mentioned David HaMelech's Tehillim about Lo'ir Rakiyata Imadi, the Nisayon, to answer your question at the beginning, how the Nisayon really is what transformed me, not so much the Bitachon, because the Nisayon gave me a different set of eyes and a different set of ears, and I now breathe a different oxygen, whereas in the past, I only saw the friendships of the rich and famous. Now I developed a certain empathy, a radar, and now I only seek the company of good people. And now I read Tehillim differently, very differently than what I did before. The davening jumps out at me with words that sometimes stab me in the gut. And when David HaMelech says in Tehillim 23, Mizmor LeDavid Hashem Roi Lo Achzar, right? Ben Oisdesha Yarbitzeini Al Mei Menilchos Yinahaleni. During tranquil times, when times are nice, David HaMelech refers to Hashem in the third person. By tranquil waters, Yarbitzeini, he leads me. He, Al Mei Menilchos Yinahaleni, he leads me. He deposits me. But then notice what happens when he talks about when he walks through the gates Almavis. When I walk through the valley of death, Lo iraraki ata imadi. Suddenly it's now second person. Now I'm in the room with you, God. David HaMelech's Tehillim, and these gems jump out of you if you have the proper Bitachon and you've gone through the Nisayon. The next, again, this is in my Tallis-bag for me to review constantly. Next, I am completely confident that I can surrender my fate to God and he will care for me. Surrender. The picture that I have in my notes is of a girl standing on a ledge, falling backwards, and her Abba is catching him. Have you ever played that game of trust? Have you ever tried it? You know that in order to relinquish and fall backwards, you have to trust in the person behind you. This image gives me so much chizuk because I know at all times God is in front of me, behind me. I was reading a memoir of a child who was in Auschwitz, and the interviewer asked the child, "Where were you during the war?" And the child says, "I was with my mommy." And the interviewer says, "But wait a minute, you were in Auschwitz." And the child says, to the child, "I'm with my mommy at all times." Where we were was a different story. But to the child's perspective, I'm in the womb of my mother at all times. Next, God orchestrates my life situations during difficult times, just as he does during good times. And it's always for my benefit. When times go good, do we remember Hashem? I have a friend who was interviewed in the LA Business Journal radio network. He made a fortune of money, several $100 million on a deal on scrap metal. And he's a frum guy. And they asked him, "What's the secret to your success?" And he went on and on about himself. I called him afterwards. I said, "Rabbi, you're an ingrate. You're a kafui tov. You didn't thank Hashem. You didn't thank your wife. You didn't thank your parents. When times are good, you took full credit. Where were you?" He goes, "Oh, what should I do?" I said, "You're like Ben Affleck with Jennifer Garner. You get an award and you don't thank your wife. The media crucifies you." But that's the reality. Hashem is doing good for us at all times. And we have to remember, Gamza Yavor, even if you're going through a hard time, Gamza Yavor, it's not permanent. You're not locked in it. And the same holds true on the other. Enjoy your good moments, celebrate them, but understand that life is a balance. And you're going to, life will probably knock the stuffing out of you too one day. And the last point on my list of 10 is that I know that God is like the most loving father. He cares about me. He is concerned about me and my family, and he is involved in every detail of our lives. Anybody, by the way, I would offer to anyone in your readership, if anybody would like to get my notes on Bitachon, I'm sure Matt and Felix will give the coordinates, how to reach me by email. I'd be happy to share it. Point is, the Bitachon is such a potent thing, and the Yetzer Hara plays on you that when you're in an Isayon and you're struggling and you might be free falling, he tries to make you forget these critical concepts. One of the reasons why Modim is placed where it's situated in the Shemona Esrei is precisely because of the temptation of forgetting. This is one of those areas of law, of hashkafa, of musar, that it's not enough to sit on your laurels because, 20 years ago, I once learned about Bitachon. This is the stuff that you need constant chazara all the time, all the time, all the time. Even if it's not for yourself, for your spouse, for your children. Everyone comes to to the patriarch of the family with worry and daga. You give them chizuk, and one day they're going to ask you, Daddy, Abba, Tati, how were you able to help us when we were down? And you'll have the mechanism, you'll have the structure.
We'll say Baruch Cohen gave me this paper, and I've had it in my Tallis-bag now for many years. So definitely need a copy for my Tallis-bag.
When I visit you, Felix, if I ever do, I'm going to peek into your Tallis-bag to see if it's there.
Baruch, I think you're going to need to make a trip. I think we're going to have to forbraying.
We can send an email. We can send an email to Baruch and get a copy of his top 10.
Yes, we can do that too.
And the truth is, thank you so much, Baruch, for sharing the 10. But I think anybody who opens up the Shar Bitachon and learns it well is going to realize that each of Baruch's top 10 are coming directly from Shar Bitachon. Maybe chapter 3 and chapter 2 and chapter 3. First of all, the 7 principles which we need to trust in anyone, and then we recognize that they are infinitely present within God. And I think a lot of his points, at least 7 of the 10, were really drawing from that important place. Listen, Baruch, there's another question I have for you, because I know beyond teaching at the Coffee Bean, you've also had a chavrusa with a Moti Kest. And my question for you regarding that is, can an ill person be cured if he has Bitachon?
Precisely an issue that we discussed. The Chovos HaLevavos says, "Kashar yiftach babore, Hashem yirafeu mecholyo." If he believes in Hashem, Hashem will cure him. And he quotes David HaMelech's Tillim, Yishlech Hashem Yirpaim, or something. I don't remember the Tillim because it's not in front of me right now. So the Mechaber of the Shar Bitachon was a Rishon. I read it as a Haftacha, as a guarantee. I spoke to other people. They said, well, I'm not entirely sure if it's a Haftacha. We're not on that level. You have to be on that exalted level. So it was a subject of great debate. It is a subject that I have asked almost every visiting rabbi to explain. I have not gotten a consensus yet. It's one of the mysteries of the Chovos HaLevavos to me, where he makes that promise. So, I guess depending on which yeshiva you went to, you get the different answer. And I don't mean to knock any discipline, but I do want to share one more thing with you, a story that I heard from Rabbi Abraham Twersky about the incredible benefit. And sometimes, as a trial lawyer, sometimes a story or a vignette enlightens the issue and it creates such a koach hatzir, such an image that I'm telling your viewers, you will never forget this message, and it'll be so clear to you. So Rabbi Twersky helped people who were recovering from addictions. And he writes about a woman living in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and she had a family tradition where every single Sunday they would get together and they would watch the football team, the Jets. Whether they won, lost, it didn't matter. They had loyalty to the Jets, and the whole family. And then circumstances happened. She had to move away from the family, but she maintained the minhag. Every Sunday she would watch the Jets, and she would watch with her sister. One Sunday she had to go elsewhere. She couldn't watch it live, so she asks her sister, please tape it for me on the VCR. I know I'm aging myself by saying VCR. She comes back home, and the sister's waiting for her, and she gives her the tape, and she says, does the worst thing you could do. She says, by the way, the Jets won. Now, you're not supposed to tell the person who asked you to tape it the outcome. But nevertheless, she goes ahead and watches the whole game, even though she knew the outcome. And she tells this to Rabbi Twersky, and she reports that all the trauma and all the tense and the nail biting and the pacing back and forth and the worrying, even during halftime when we were 20 points behind, I never worried because I knew the Jets were going to win. And Rabbi Twersky said, that, my dear, is the definition of Bitachon. It reduces the daga, it reduces the worry, because you know the Jets won. That was the point that I wanted to make.
Thank you.
So
you sound speechless, gentlemen.
No, Baruch. So you bring up a really good point, right? So yes, knowing that in the end the Jets win is one thing, but as you point out, when someone is in the heat of their darkness, of their illness, their own personal illness, or worse, even worse really is the illness of a close family member, it seems very dark and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to see that positive ending. So how do you make it so? How do you make it so that it's like you saw the videotape? An idea or two on how do you make that happen?
Because, my friend Felix, it depends on how you define winning. Winning doesn't necessarily mean the sick will be cured. For all we know, winning could mean that the neshama needs to die at a certain day because it fulfilled its tafkid in life. It's now got guaranteed Gan Eden because it didn't mess up. If he would live another month, maybe it would tarnish his record up in Shemayim. How do we know what win means? People say, I'm sorry you lost your child. I don't use the word lost. Loss connotes failure. Hillary Clinton lost the race, Baruch Hashem. But if our goal in life in raising children and having children is so that someday they live good lives so that they get into Gan Eden, let's assume that's the goalpost. Didn't I win? So I don't say she lost, I lost her. I say she died. But it depends. I've redefined the definition of winning and losing. Sometimes we have to think beyond the curtain. Sometimes we have to kind of project what could be going up in heaven. It could be that the neshama asked to be put into the body. We actually know from the Leshem, Rav Elyashiv's grandfather, we know from his sefer, the Leshem, that the neshama asks to be put into the body that is going to have the nisyonos and the tests for a limited period of time so that it could then be released to enjoy its Olam Haba. So while we're all crying on earth, which is the right thing to do, the neshama could be very well celebrating. And there could be a parade and a convention, a huge applause up in Shemayim that here's a successful neshama who went through the journey and used the nisyonos to cleanse their sins. So how do we know what winning is?
Right. So it sounds like what you're saying is that oftentimes our worry, our fear, our anger is based upon what could be expectations that are not maybe accurate or need to be redefined, possibly.
Correct. Well said. I mean, we have a very finite perspective on life. You imagine if I pulled open the parochos of the Aron Kodesh, of the Kodesh Kodashim. Let's assume I gave you a glimpse. I don't know if you're old enough to know about Word Perfect, but the reveal codes.
Absolutely.
What if I showed you the reveal codes and suddenly what you thought was bad is ultimately good? And yet you cried and it burned you and it hurt and you felt like chucking Yiddishkeit and taking your yarmulke and throw all of the above. What if you were privy to that? Like the Matrix, I give you the blue pill or the red pill. What if I gave you that pill where you now had clarity of sight and you saw the big picture? Would we still adhere to our vocabulary and say it was bad? Would we still insist that it's a tragedy, or maybe it was the greatest thing for the neshama? We don't know. If you look at the Sefer Gesher HaChaim by Rav Michal Tukachinsky, he writes about the two infants, the two fetuses in the womb. And one says, this world is it. This is it. And the other infant says, no, I believe we have eyes to see great things and ears to hear beautiful music and mouths to eat great foods. And the first is an agnostic. He's not a believer. And he goes, you don't know what you're talking about. And then labor comes. and the second child is the first to go. And there's turmoil inside the womb, and the first child, who's not a believer, the first fetus goes, "This is the end of the world. This is a tragedy." It might even hear the old slap in the tuchus that the doctor used to give, right, to cause the kid to cry, which doesn't happen anymore. But you hear the cries of the baby coming out, and inside the womb, he thinks it's a tragedy. My brother just died, right? Doesn't realize it's the beginning of life. The Gesher HaChaim writes that there's 4 births. Listen to this. He says the first birth is when Hashem plucks the neshama from the Heichal HaNeshama and designates it to live in 2022. The second birth is the moment of intimacy between husband and wife, when the neshama merges with what is generated. The third birth is 9 months later, when the body comes out. And guess what Rav Tukachinsky's 4th birth is? Yetzias HaNeshama. That if the neshama fulfilled its tafkid in life, its moment of death is a birth. So what we think is negative could very well be the greatest positive. When we see a ship leaving the port and it goes away and away, 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 finally we can't see it anymore. To us, we see it as a disaster. It's gone. But there's a port on the other side of the ocean that sees that ship coming closer and closer and closer. This is not my thought. This is the word of the Koheles Rabbah, the ships of the Koheles Rabbah. So it depends how you define, bad, Felix.
Right. So Baruch, what is the best spiritual tool we can use for medical recovery? And what is the worst?
Despair is the worst. Despair is absolutely the worst. Giving up hope. We know that halachically, there's a halacha of hashavas aveda. You familiar with the halacha? Halacha is if someone loses an object and you find it, are you allowed to keep it? Well, the criteria, the controlling criteria is whether I was miya'ish, whether I gave up. If I gave up hope of ever getting it back, you are free to keep it. But if I did not give up, you have to return it to me. That's the law of hashavas aveda. And we believe that Hashem, sort of kaviyachol, follows the very Torah that he asks us to keep. When a neshama is now sick, when a body is sick, and the Malach HaMavis wants to reclaim this lost body, so to speak, he won't be able to if we're not miyash. He has to return the soul based on the laws of Hashavas Aveda. A person who gives up, a person who is miyash, demonstrates that he doesn't truly understand the power of tefillah, he doesn't understand the koyach tefillah, and he truly is disconnected from Bitachon. That lifeline, that connection, that belief, that constant prayer is what Hashem might be asking of you to do in order to restore the neshama to the sick body. So I'm answering you in reverse, Felix. I know what's the worst. I can't tell you what's the best because my scenario didn't end up the way I wanted it to. But I know what is the absolute samavis. The poison pill is despair. And I also know that for those who are after the fact, who might be bereaved parents or after a tragedy, the absolute worst thing to do is guilt. Do not torture yourself. Do not plague yourself. Don't blame yourself for someone's dying. Don't ever do that. Because that would be like stepping off a cliff, going down a steep ravine that's greased on its walls with no way out. There is no way you can ever recuperate from such a fall. No good will come of it. I always challenge the people who say, "Oh, I'm enough of a ben Torah, I could do it." I go, really? Where does it get you at the end of the day if you engage in guilt? How do you then do tshuva for it? It's not healthy. And the Malach HaMavis and the Yetzer Hara try to get us discouraged. And the guilt and the fear are its tools in its arsenal. And despair if you're sick, and guilt after the fact. Don't be frum and say, "No, I can do it. I can do a cheshbon hanefesh. I'm strong enough. I know exactly. If I only figure out what sin I did to cause this disaster, then I'll cure it." Well, it's an attempt to gain control over a situation you have no control over. So it's a mirage. And secondly, it's not healthy. We're not built out of the same fiber that the Nevi'im and, Malach, the kings had. A little spark will incinerate our tissue paper. Okay? They were made out of oak trees. You can't burn it down easily with a match. We're like tissue paper. We're weak. I acknowledge it. So don't go against the advice of the experts and engage in guilt and despair. It's moments like this, moments of trial and tribulation, which is the laboratory, that divide the men from the boys. To those people who think Bitachon is like a magic pill, you drive, you see a parking spot, you put a coin in, you get your time. This is wonderful. Everyone's promising, like Einod Milvado, the promises of Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, and Einod. It's easy. All I have to do is say Einod Milvado, and it works. That's so simple. It's a lifetime of work. It's a lifetime of focus, a lifetime of review, and reviewing your notes over and over. Because again, the Yetzer Hara chips away at you and wears at you and tries to weaken you and demoralize you and make you forget what you know.
Baruch, is Bitachon enough, or do we also need prayer?
Well, I really view both as the same. Think about the end of Uvo L'Tzion. Bitchu b'Hashem ad hayad ki v'yah Hashem etzar olamim v'yiftechu v'riyot yishmecha ki lo azavta darshecha Hashem. Right? It's loaded with Bitachon. It's not either or. Person who has proper Bitachon, I think it will be a magnificent davener. Speaking of davening, and I fall prey to this also, I know that when I'm late to court, my davening, I don't know if you remember Evelyn Wood's The Speed Reading. So I can master davening in record speed if I have to zip it to get to court. But that's not usually the case. I try to have kavana, but I do see people who are, page turners, and they're not really focused. They're not connecting. The words don't really jump out at them. And, if you ask them, what exactly did you daven? They never really invest in their spiritual portfolio. So I think that an ancillary to the increase in Bitachon is a newfound awareness of the tefillah. And the truth of the matter is, if you go through davening, it is so loaded with beautiful psukim from Tehillim. If you look at the Shar HaBitachon, he quotes from David HaMelech's Tehillim left and right. If you want to do yourself a favor and track every single time David HaMelech is mentioned in Chovos HaLevavos Shar HaBitachon, and just take a yellow highlighter, and in your sitter, highlight anything that jumps out at you, like Uval Tzion. What words jump out at you? With me, it's an Aleinu. Hu Eloheinu ein od. That's it. It's only God. Until I realize that ein od milvado is contained in ein od, right? So now it's highlighted. If anyone wants to see what issues are important to me, we'll open up my private sitter, which is in the shul, and look at all my highlights and see these, and because you studied it, it enhances your tefillah.
Baruch Cohen, thank you so much for joining the Gate of Trust podcast. You're not only a star litigator, but you're also a master of Bitachon. I think we've all gained tremendously from hearing about you, and we would all love to get a copy of that Tallis-bag cheat sheet of Bitachon. I'm sure you'll tell us how to find you. Let us know where we can find you and how we can get a copy of that Tallis-bag Bitachon cheat sheet.
Okay, so my email is Baruch Cohen at baruchcohenesq.com. BARUCH, Cohen, COHEN. Again, Baruch Cohen, ESQ.com. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Your questions are precise and accurate and very insightful. It shows that you are the masters of your game. You really are Mavak Sheyemes. And that's a great quality to have as a podcast hosters.
Thank you. Thank you for your accolades, but also thank you for your masterclass in Bitachon. It was excellent, and thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences and the learnings that came from your own experiences. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. Stay in the fight and see you in court one day. Be well, gentlemen.
Thank you, Baruch.
Thank you.
Felix, that was incredible. We have a masterclass in Bitachon.
I think
not to mention,
it really was.
He's probably going to send us the bill for that.
I think that's going to cost us for sure. But he's a Hollywood attorney. How much could it be?
Right, an hour. It was just an hour of his time.
Just an hour.
What do you think of an hour of that
could
cost?
it be? I mean, a couple
Star
thousand.
litigator.
Well, it's worth it though. But seriously, the thing is that he obviously the struggles he experienced, you can tell from his countenance and from the deep learning and the work that he's done on himself and through the work of Bitachon and all of his Torah sources, that he really has come to a good process. And as he pointed out, one cannot necessarily be over or all the way through, but he certainly is able to deal with it in such an effective manner and gave really great advice for anyone who's struggling or has had struggles to apply these principles, these Torah principles of trust to at least making things better and getting to a new level of understanding to create calmness and peace and happiness.
Baruch made an amazing point about the fact that when the teacher of Bitachon is someone who he himself has suffered through a challenge and he's come out of it with stronger Bitachon, that he or she is an even better teacher than somebody who may know the text better, let's say. So I think the fact that Baruch has been through so much and feels lost and has experienced the strengthening that comes with Bitachon, he is really one of the best people I've ever met to be able to give over words of wisdom for how to have Bitachon and how to deal with pain and suffering and loss.
I think, Matt, I don't think we're kidding when we're saying masterclass, because really, when you look at a masterclass, the people that give a masterclass are chefs and actors and rabbis and individuals who are at the highest level and are masters in that area. And through his experiences, his ability to share with us really does put him at a different level, and really, really appreciate his ability to be so transparent and to be so authentic with something that generally for most people would be very, very difficult to relate. But he did it with great poise and with great impact. Really impactful episode. I'm excited that people will hear it and also be inspired.
Me too. So now that we've been swimming with the sharks, let's go out and put our bathing suits on and
I gotta go take a trip with some of the goldfish.
Have a good one, Felix.
Have a good one. Thank you, Matt.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Gate of Trust podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a rating, and share the podcast with the people you love. To access today's show notes, ask Matt and Felix a question, or suggest a Gate of Trust story to be featured on the show, visit gateoftrust.org/podcast.
You think you got it under control, you're on a roll, living it up, living your dreams. But when it all goes bust at the seams, then you scream and cry to the one on high.